Sometimes we think we know the people we love until they're gone, and we discover we never really knew them at all. Jamal learned this truth standing in his late father's garage, holding a ring of keys with trembling hands. He was 45, raising 2 kids alone, and drowning in bills he couldn't pay. His father had been a simple mechanic, or so Jamal thought. The funeral was 3 days behind him when he finally opened that garage to clean it out. 2 canvas tarps covered something in the back corner, probably old junkers his father never got around to fixing. But when Jamal pulled back those covers, his breath caught. 2 pristine cars with shocking history and unbelievable value. What else had his father hidden from him? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days earlier, Jamal had stood in the chapel and listened to people say things about his father that felt true but incomplete. Vernon Carter had been dependable, they said. A hard worker. A man who kept to himself but would fix your car for half what the dealership charged. The words were kind and honest, but they sketched only the outline of a man, not the full portrait. Jamal sat in the front pew between his children, feeling the weight of grief settle into his bones like an unwelcome guest planning a long stay. To his left, 16-year-old Terrell sat rigid in his only suit, the one they'd bought for his grandfather's funeral. The boy's jaw was tight, holding back tears he thought made him look weak. To Jamal's right, 12-year-old Keisha clutched a small sketchbook, her fingers occasionally moving as if drawing invisible lines on the cover. She processed everything through art, always had. Behind them, the small gathering spoke in hushed tones. Vernon hadn't been a social man. The attendees were mostly neighbors, a few customers from over the years, and family. Jamal's older sister Diane sat 1 row back with her husband, her expression composed in that way she had of keeping everything tidy and controlled. She'd already asked twice about the house, about Vernon's affairs, about what needed to be handled. Diane thought in lists and logistics, which Jamal supposed was her way of managing grief. Uncle Bernard, Vernon's younger brother, sat near the back. He was the only one who'd cried openly during the service, his weathered face wet with tears he didn't bother hiding. Bernard had worked construction his whole life, building things with his hands like Vernon had, though Bernard had never possessed his brother's quiet intensity. The pastor spoke about eternal rest and the comfort of faith. Jamal tried to listen, tried to find solace in the familiar words, but his mind kept drifting to all the conversations he'd never had with his father, all the questions he'd never asked because there had always seemed to be more time. Vernon had been 68 when his heart gave out. Not young, but not ancient either. He'd been working in his garage, doing what he loved, and simply collapsed. The doctor said it was quick, that Vernon probably didn't suffer. Jamal wondered if that was supposed to be comforting. His father had died alone, surrounded by tools and engine parts, instead of family. That felt like the story of Vernon's life somehow. After the service, people gathered at the house. The small ranch-style home where Jamal had grown up looked exactly as it had for 40 years. Same beige siding, same neat lawn, same American flag. Vernon raised every morning and lowered every evening with military precision, though he'd never served. Just believed in doing things the right way. Inside, neighbors brought casseroles and condolences. Jamal moved through the rooms accepting both, feeling disconnected from his own grief. He had to be strong for Terrell and Keisha. Had to handle the details, had to be the responsible one, the way his father had always been. "The house is paid off at least," Diane said, finding him in the kitchen. She was arranging food that kept arriving, organizing it with the same efficiency she brought to her job as a hospital administrator. "That's something." And the lawyer said, "The will is straightforward. Everything goes to you." "I don't want to think about that right now," Jamal said. "I know, but we have to be practical. You're a teacher, Jamal. You've got 2 kids and—" She stopped herself, but he knew what she'd been about to say. "You've got 2 kids and you're barely making ends meet." It was true. Jamal taught 8th grade history at Washington Middle School, and while he loved the work, loved shaping young minds and making the past come alive for kids who thought history was boring, the salary was modest. He'd been scraping by since his wife Angela had died 4 years ago. Cancer had taken her quickly, brutally, leaving him alone with 2 children and medical bills that still haunted him. Vernon had helped where he could, quietly. A $50 bill pressed into Jamal's hand at holidays. The kids' school clothes purchased without asking. The electric bill paid when Jamal fell behind. His father had never made a show of it, never made Jamal feel small for needing help. Just did what needed doing. Dad kept everything organized, Jamal said, wanting to change the subject. I'm sure the paperwork is all in order. Diane nodded. He was always meticulous. Remember how he labeled everything in the garage? Every single tool had its place, the garage. Jamal hadn't been inside Vernon's workshop in years. As a boy, he'd spent hours there, watching his father work on engines with a focus that bordered on meditative. Vernon would explain what he was doing, patient and thorough, but he never pushed Jamal to take up the trade. When Jamal showed more interest in books than carburetors, Vernon had simply nodded and bought him a library card. You thinking about what to do with his tools? Diane asked. Haven't thought that far ahead. Bernard might want some of them, or you could sell them. Some of that equipment is probably worth... Diane! Jamal's voice came out sharper than intended. Can we not do this right now? His sister's expression tightened, but she backed off. I'm just trying to help. He knew she was. Diane had always been the practical sibling, the one who planned ahead and managed details. When their mother died 20 years ago, Diane had been the one who organized everything while Jamal fell apart. She showed love through action, through handling things. He shouldn't snap at her for being who she was. I know, he said more gently. I'm sorry. I just need time. She touched his arm. Take what you need. I'm here when you're ready to deal with everything. Uncle Bernard found him later, out on the back porch where Jamal had escaped for air. The older man handed him a beer without asking if he wanted one. Your daddy was proud of you, Bernard said, settling into the weathered porch chair that had been there since Jamal's childhood. Don't know if he said it enough, but he was. He didn't say it at all, Jamal replied, then immediately felt guilty for the bitterness in his voice. Bernard chuckled, but there was sadness in it. Vernon wasn't much for words. Neither was our daddy, come to think of it. Guess some things run in families. They sat in silence for a while, drinking their beers and watching the sun set behind the neighbor's fence. Jamal thought about all the evenings he'd spent on this porch as a kid, reading books while his father worked in the garage. Vernon would emerge at dusk, hands clean but permanently stained with traces of oil, and sit in this same chair. They'd exist in comfortable silence, father and son, connected but separate. He ever talked to you about his work? Jamal asked. I mean beyond the regular mechanic stuff. Bernard gave him an odd look. What do you mean? I don't know. Just seems like there was a lot about Dad I didn't know. People at the funeral kept mentioning things, trips he took, people he knew. I didn't know about any of it. Vernon played things close to the vest, Bernard said carefully. Always did. But he was a good man, Jamal. Whatever he did it right. It was a strange thing to say, Jamal thought. Whatever he did, as if there were questions about what Vernon had been up to. But before he could pursue it, Terrell appeared at the screen door. Dad, Keisha's asking when we're going home. Home, their apartment across town, small and cramped but theirs. Jamal realized he'd been thinking of this house as home, the way he had as a child. But it wasn't his home anymore. Hadn't been for decades. Soon, Jamal said. Tell her soon. The next 2 days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. The lawyer, a kind older woman named Mrs. Patterson, walked him through Vernon's will. It was indeed straightforward. The house, the tools, a modest savings account, and whatever was in the garage, all left to Jamal. There was a separate sealed envelope marked Personal Effects. Jamal to inventory. Your father was very specific, Mrs. Patterson said. He wanted you to go through his garage yourself. Take your time with it. Those were his exact words. Take your time. Now, standing at the garage door with those keys in his hand, Jamal understood why he'd been putting this off. Opening this door felt like the final goodbye, the last conversation he'd never have with his father. Once he cleaned out this space, sorted through Vernon's tools and projects, that would be it. The last physical evidence of his father's life, catalogued and dispersed. But it had to be done. The kids needed him to be strong to handle this. So Jamal took a breath, fitted the key in the lock, and opened the door to his father's secret world. The smell hit him first. Not the stale odor of abandonment he'd expected, but the clean scent of mineral spirits and metal polish. Someone had been maintaining this space recently, his father, right up until the end. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the beams like tiny planets in their own solar system. Jamal stepped inside and felt time collapse. Everything was exactly as he remembered, yet somehow unfamiliar. The pegboard wall displayed tools in perfect order, each one outlined in black marker, so you knew precisely where it belonged. Wrenches arranged by size, screwdrivers grouped by type, sockets in graduated rows. It was the kind of organization that spoke of discipline, of a mind that found peace in order. The workbench ran along the left wall, its surface scarred by decades of use, but meticulously clean. A few projects sat in various stages, a carburetor mid-rebuild, a brake assembly waiting for new pads. Vernon's reading glasses rested beside a shop manual opened to a page on fuel injection systems. Jamal picked them up, felt their weight, imagined his father's eyes behind these lenses just days ago. On a shelf above the bench sat a worn leather notebook. Jamal pulled it down and opened it carefully. His father's handwriting filled the pages, neat, precise columns, documenting work done, parts ordered, customers served. The journal went back decades. Jamal flipped through entries from the 1980s, the 1990s, watching his father's life scroll past in mechanical detail. But there were other entries too, scattered among the work logs. Personal notes that seemed out of place. Called Sterling about the acquisition. Trip to Barrett-Jackson next month. Provenance documentation filed. The language was cryptic, businesslike. Not the voice of a small-town mechanic fixing neighbors' cars. Jamal set the journal aside and continued his survey. The garage was larger than he remembered, or maybe it just felt that way, without his father's presence filling it. 2 bays, both empty now, or so he thought. That's when he noticed the back corner. 2 large shapes covered by heavy canvas tarps, tucked against the far wall where shadows pooled. His father had always kept project cars back there. Vehicles waiting for restoration, parts donors, things he'd get to eventually. Jamal had assumed those would be gone by now, sold off or scrapped. He approached slowly, his footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. The tarps were industrial grade, not the thin plastic sheeting you'd throw over something temporarily. These were meant to protect, to preserve. Dust had settled on them, but not much. Recent care was evident in everything here. Jamal grabbed the edge of the first tarp. It was heavier than expected, fitted carefully around whatever it covered. He pulled it back, the canvas sliding free with a whisper of fabric against metal. Burgundy paint gleamed in the sudden light. Chrome caught the sun and threw it back like a challenge. Jamal stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. A 1967 Shelby GT 500 sat before him, pristine and perfect. The iconic white racing stripes ran from hood to trunk, the aggressive stance of the muscle car somehow predatory even at rest. This wasn't some rusted project waiting for restoration. This was a finished masterpiece, a vehicle worth more than Jamal made in several years of teaching. His hands shook as he moved closer. The paint was flawless, the chrome without a single pit. He peered through the window at an interior that looked factory fresh. Black leather seats, wood-rimmed steering wheel, gauges that probably still worked perfectly. A set of keys hung from the ignition, a tag attached in his father's handwriting. Shelby, 1967, for Jamal. For Jamal. His father had left him this car. But how? Where had it come from? Vernon fixed cars, he didn't collect them. Certainly didn't own anything like this. The insurance alone would have cost more than... Jamal's thoughts stuttered to a halt as he remembered the second tarp. He moved to it with legs that felt disconnected from his body. This cover was even more carefully fitted, sealed around the edges with weights to keep dust from penetrating. His fingers fumbled with the fastenings, his mind already racing ahead to what might be underneath. The tarp came free and time seemed to stop. A 1961 Ferrari 250 GT SWB sat before him. Its red paint the color of arterial blood, its lines so elegant they seemed to flow like water frozen in metal. Jamal didn't know much about cars, had never inherited his father's passion for them, but he knew enough to recognize that this wasn't just valuable. This was legendary. This was museum quality. This was impossible. He stood there, moving his gaze between the two vehicles, trying to make his brain accept what his eyes were seeing. His father, Vernon Carter, small-town mechanic, had owned a Shelby GT 500 and a Ferrari 250 GT, two cars that together represented more wealth than Jamal had ever imagined touching. Two cars that changed everything. The Ferrari had keys in the ignition too. Jamal opened the driver's door. It moved on hinges so smooth they must have been recently serviced, and slid into the seat. The leather embraced him, butter-soft and cool. The steering wheel fit his hands perfectly. The key begged to be turned, but Jamal couldn't bring himself to start it. Not yet. This was too much to process. He reached for the glove compartment, found it full of documentation in plastic sleeves. Original purchase receipts, restoration records, authenticity certificates with official seals and signatures, his father's name on transfer documents, insurance papers listing values that made Jamal's vision swim. The Shelby, estimated value $400,000 to $600,000. The Ferrari, estimated value $8 million to $12 million. Jamal got out of the car and sat down hard on the concrete floor, his back against the workbench, staring at the two vehicles that had just rewritten his entire understanding of his father's life. Vernon had been worth millions, had owned cars that collectors would kill for, had lived in a modest house and worked in this garage and never said a word. Why? His phone was in his hand before he realized he was calling. Diane answered on the second ring. "You need to come over here," Jamal said, his voice strange to his own ears. "You need to see what's in Dad's garage." "What?" "Jamal, I'm at work." "Diane, come now." "Trust me." Silence on the line then. "You're scaring me." "What did you find?" "Just come." "Bring Bernard if you can reach him." He ended the call and sat there, surrounded by the impossible. The journal, the cars, the documentation. They were puzzle pieces to a picture he'd never seen. His father had lived a double life, had moved through a world Jamal didn't know existed. The modest mechanic who fixed neighbors' cars for cheap had been something else entirely. Someone else. Jamal looked at the Shelby's tag again. For Jamal. His father had meant for him to have this, to find this. But why hide it? Why not tell him while he was alive? They could have talked about it, could have shared this incredible secret. Instead, Vernon had taken it to his grave, leaving Jamal to discover his father's true life, only after it was too late to ask him about it. Footsteps on the driveway announced Diane's arrival. She'd broken speed limits getting here, apparently. Bernard pulled up right behind her, his truck's engine rattling in that way it had for years. "Jamal, what?" Diane started, but stopped when she saw his face. "What happened?" He stood, gestured toward the back of the garage. "Look for yourself." They moved past him, their expressions shifting from concern to confusion to absolute shock as they took in the two vehicles gleaming in the afternoon light. "Holy Mother of—" Bernard breathed. Diane just stood there, her mouth open, her practical administrator's brain clearly unable to process what she was seeing. "Those are real," she finally managed. "Very real," Jamal said. "Documentation in the Ferrari says they're worth somewhere between $8 and $12 million, combined." Bernard moved closer to the Shelby, his hands hovering over the paint without quite touching it, as if it might vanish if he made contact. "Your daddy had these. All this time?" "Apparently." "But how? Where did he get them? When?" "I don't know," Jamal said. "The journal has some entries that don't make sense. References to acquisitions and provenance. There's a name that keeps coming up, Sterling. No last name, no context." Diane had recovered enough to move to the Ferrari, her eyes scanning the documentation visible through the open door. "This has to be a mistake. Some kind of, I don't know, replicas? Kit cars?" The papers look real. The VIN numbers match. Everything checks out. Bernard let out a low whistle. Your daddy had a whole life none of us knew about. The words hung in the garage like smoke, impossible to dispel. Jamal felt the weight of them settle over his grief, adding layers he hadn't expected. He'd been mourning the father he thought he knew. Now he had to mourn the father he'd never know, the man who'd kept this enormous secret. We need to figure out what to do, Diane said, slipping into problem-solving mode, because that's what she did when the world stopped making sense. Get these appraised, properly insured. I need to understand, Jamal interrupted. Before we do anything else, I need to understand who Dad really was. He picked up the journal, flipped to an entry marked 6 months before Vernon's death. A phone number was written there, next to the name Sterling. I'm calling this number, Jamal said. Jamal, maybe we should think, but he was already dialing, his heart pounding. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Jamal expected voicemail, expected disconnection. Instead, a voice answered, smooth and cultured, tinged with age, but still strong. Sterling Acquisitions. Jamal's mouth went dry. My name is Jamal Carter. I'm calling about my father, Vernon Carter. The silence that followed was so long, Jamal thought the connection had dropped. Then Vernon's son. I wondered when someone would call. Your father was a remarkable man, Jamal. We have much to discuss. That night, Jamal couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment, listening to the hum of traffic outside and the occasional creak of pipes in the walls. His mind kept returning to those 2 cars, sitting in his father's garage, impossible and real, like something from a dream that refused to fade in daylight. He'd taken photos of everything before leaving. The cars, the documentation, pages from his father's journal. Now he scrolled through them on his phone, zooming in on details, trying to extract meaning from chrome and leather and his father's careful handwriting. Sterling had agreed to meet him tomorrow at a cafe downtown. The man's voice on the phone had carried weight, authority, and something else, genuine affection when he spoke Vernon's name. Your father and I worked together for many years, he'd said. I owed him a great deal. Let me help you understand. Understand. That's what Jamal needed more than anything. More than the money, though God knew the money would change everything. More than the cars themselves, beautiful as they were. He needed to understand who his father had really been. At 6 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and made coffee. Darrell emerged from his room an hour later, drawn by the smell and the unusual sound of his father awake this early on a Saturday. You okay, Dad? The boy was shirtless, wearing basketball shorts, his frame lean and strong from hours on the court. He'd inherited his mother's height and his grandfather's quiet intensity. Couldn't sleep, Jamal admitted. Come sit down. I need to talk to you and your sister about something. Concern flickered across Terrell's face. Is something wrong? No, actually something's very right. Just unexpected. Keisha appeared a few minutes later, her hair wrapped in a silk bonnet, her pajamas featuring cartoon characters she was probably too old for, but refused to give up. She was the artist, the dreamer, the one who saw the world in colors and shapes, the rest of them missed. Jamal showed them the photos on his phone, watched their faces transform from sleepy confusion to wide-eyed wonder as they swiped through images of the Shelby and the Ferrari. These are Grandpa's? Terrell breathed. For real? For real. He left them to us. How much are they worth? Always practical, his son. Always thinking ahead. A lot. Enough to pay for college. Enough to... Jamal paused, not wanting to make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Enough to change things for us. Keisha was quieter, studying the photos with an artist's eye. They're beautiful. Did you know Grandpa had them? No, sweetheart. I had no idea. Why would he hide them? It was the question that had kept Jamal awake all night. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. He told them about Sterling, about the meeting today. Terrell wanted to come along, but Jamal shook his head. Let me talk to this man first, figure out what's what. Then I'll share everything with you both. I promise. After breakfast, he dropped the kids at his sister's house. Diane met him at the door, her expression a mix of concern and excitement. She clearly spent her night researching classic cars because she immediately launched into market values and auction results. Do you know how rare that Ferrari is? There were only 176 made. Only 176 in the entire world, Jamal. If it's authentic, it's authentic. Then you're sitting on a fortune. We need to get it appraised immediately. I called a guy I know who deals in classic cars, and he gave me a name. Lawrence Cunningham. He's one of the best in the region. She handed him a business card. Jamal pocketed it, grateful for his sister's efficiency even as it overwhelmed him. I'm meeting with Sterling first, he said. The man who worked with Dad. Then I'll call this appraiser. Be careful, Jamal. People in the high-end car world, they can be sharks. Don't let anyone take advantage of you. I won't. But as he drove downtown to meet Sterling, Jamal wondered if he'd even recognize being taken advantage of. He was a middle school history teacher. What did he know about million-dollar cars and the people who traded them? The cafe was upscale, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a menu that didn't list prices. Jamal felt underdressed in his khakis and button-down shirt, surrounded by people in business suits having power breakfasts. Sterling was easy to spot. An older black man, probably mid-70s, sat at a corner table with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He wore an expensive suit, his silver hair cut precisely, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup with the ease of someone who belonged in places like this. He stood when Jamal approached, extending a hand. Jamal, you look just like your father did at your age. Please, sit. They shook hands. Sterling's grip was firm, his eyes kind but assessing. Jamal had the distinct impression of being measured, evaluated. Thank you for meeting me, Jamal said, settling into the chair across from him. Of course. Vernon spoke of you often. He was very proud of you, you know. Your choice to teach, to shape young minds. He admired that. The words landed harder than Jamal expected. His father had been proud. Vernon had never said so, never hinted at it. Sterling seemed to read his thoughts. Your father wasn't good with words, was he? Expressed himself through actions instead, through what he built, what he left behind. He left behind 2 cars I didn't know existed, Jamal said. And a lot of questions. I imagine so. Sterling signaled a waiter, ordered them both coffee and breakfast without asking what Jamal wanted. The presumption should have annoyed him, but somehow it didn't. This was a man used to taking care of details. When the waiter left, Sterling leaned back in his chair and studied Jamal for a long moment. What did you think your father did for a living? He was a mechanic. Fixed cars for people in the neighborhood. Charged reasonable rates. Kept to himself. All true, Sterling said, but incomplete. Vernon was also one of the finest automotive detectives I've ever known. And I've known many. Automotive detective. Someone who finds lost cars. Rare vehicles that have disappeared from records, that collectors believe are gone forever. Vernon had a gift for tracing them through obscure channels, following paper trails that would stump most people. He could look at a parts requisition from 1963 and tell you where a car might have ended up. Jamal tried to reconcile this description with the quiet man who'd raised him. How did he get into that? Sterling smiled. Through me, actually. We met in the early 80s at an estate sale. I was representing a client who wanted to acquire a particular vehicle, and Vernon was there browsing. We got to talking, and I realized he had knowledge most dealers would kill for. Offered him contract work on the spot. What kind of work? Research mostly, finding vehicles, authenticating them, sometimes negotiating purchases on behalf of clients who preferred anonymity. Vernon was perfect for it, meticulous, discreet, honest to a fault. In our world, that last quality is rarer than any car. The waiter returned with food. Jamal hadn't realized he was hungry until the omelette appeared in front of him. Sterling continued while they ate. Your father worked with my firm for nearly 20 years. Made excellent money, probably more than you'd guess. But he never flaunted it. Never moved to a bigger house or bought flashy things. Just kept fixing cars in his garage and living his quiet life. Why? Because that's who he was. The work we did together was exciting, connected him to a larger world, but it wasn't his real life. His real life was you, your family, his community. The detective work was just his secret adventure. Jamal thought about all the times his father had been away on business. Brief trips Vernon never explained beyond vague mentions of car shows or auctions. Now those absences made sense, sort of. The car's in his garage, Jamal said. How did he get them? Sterling's expression grew more serious. Those were his retirement fund. His legacy for you. Vernon earned substantial commissions over the years, and he invested almost all of it in vehicles. Bought them carefully, always through legitimate channels, always with proper documentation. He saw them as assets that would appreciate, that would give his family security long after he was gone. Why didn't he just tell me? We could have talked about this. I could have known him better. Pride, maybe. Or protection. Vernon didn't want you to feel obligated to follow his path. He was thrilled when you became a teacher. Did you know that? Kept newspaper clippings of your students' achievements any time the school was mentioned in the paper. He believed you'd found your calling, and he didn't want to overshadow that with his own work. The words created an ache in Jamal's chest. His father had been proud, had followed his career, had respected his choices, but Vernon had never said any of it out loud, had never shared this connection while he was alive. Sterling reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. These are photographs from over the years. Your father at various auctions and car shows. I thought you might want them. Jamal opened the folder. Image after image showed Vernon in a world Jamal had never seen. His father standing beside rare automobiles, shaking hands with well-dressed people, examining engines with experts clustered around him. In every photo, Vernon looked confident, engaged, alive in a way Jamal remembered only glimpsed in the garage. He turned down opportunities to expand, Sterling said quietly. Could have moved to California, worked with bigger collectors, made even more money. But he always said no. His priority was staying close to you, being there even if you didn't know you needed him there. Jamal had to look away, blinking hard against sudden tears. All those years he'd thought his father was distant, emotionally unavailable. But maybe Vernon had simply loved in a language Jamal hadn't understood. The Shelby and the Ferrari, Sterling continued, those were his prize acquisitions. The Shelby he found through an estate sale, purchased it for a fraction of current value because he spotted it before anyone else realized what it was. The Ferrari, that one has a more complicated history. Something in Sterling's tone made Jamal look up. Complicated how? The provenance, the ownership history has some gaps. Not unusual for cars that old, but it means documentation is crucial. Your father was very careful to verify everything, to make sure the chain of ownership was legitimate. He kept extensive records. Are you saying there might be problems with it? I'm saying the high-end car market can be tricky. People make claims, disputes arise over ownership, especially with vehicles worth millions. Your father knew that. That's why he was so meticulous with documentation. A chill ran down Jamal's spine. Should I be worried? Sterling met his eyes. Your father was one of the most principled men I ever knew. If he acquired that Ferrari, he did it legitimately. But in this business, it's always wise to have your ducks in a row. Get everything appraised, authenticated, insured. Cover your bases. They talked for another hour. Sterling shared stories about Vernon, about deals they'd worked together, about the respect Vernon had earned in a rarefied world. He offered to connect Jamal with reputable dealers when he was ready to sell, warned him about common scams and predatory collectors. When they finally parted, Sterling gripped Jamal's hand firmly. Your father would be proud of how you're handling this. And if you need anything, advice, contacts, just someone to talk to, call me. I owed Vernon a great deal. Let me help his son. Driving home, Jamal felt like he'd met his father for the first time. Not the quiet mechanic who'd raised him, but the skilled professional who'd moved through an exclusive world with confidence and integrity. The two versions of Vernon didn't contradict each other. They completed each other, showed the full picture of a complex man who'd loved his family enough to keep his two lives carefully separated. Back at the apartment, he pulled out the business. Card Diane had given him and called Lawrence Cunningham, the appraiser. The man answered immediately, his voice professional but warm. "I'd be happy to take a look at your vehicles, Mr. Carter. Based on what your sister described, this sounds like a very special collection. When would be convenient?" They scheduled an appointment for Monday, 2 days away. 2 days to sit with this new understanding of his father, to process the grief that had taken on new dimensions. Lawrence Cunningham arrived Monday morning in a Mercedes sedan that probably cost more than Jamal made in 3 years. He was a white man in his 60s, dressed in what Jamal was learning to recognize as the uniform of the wealthy: expensive but understated clothes, quality shoes, a watch that didn't announce its value but somehow communicated it anyway. "Mr. Carter," he said, offering his hand, "thank you for allowing me to view your collection." Collection. The word felt foreign. Jamal had owned these cars for less than a week, and they still didn't feel like his. They were Vernon's. Would always be Vernon's in some fundamental way. "Please call me Jamal, and thank you for coming." He led Lawrence to the garage. Uncle Bernard was already there, having shown up unannounced with coffee and donuts, claiming he wanted to see this appraisal happen. Jamal suspected his uncle just wanted to be part of the story, to witness history being made. He couldn't blame him. Lawrence's professional demeanor cracked the moment he saw the vehicles. His eyes widened, his breath caught, and for a long moment he simply stood there, taking them in. "Extraordinary," he breathed. "Absolutely extraordinary." He approached the Shelby first, pulling a small flashlight and magnifying glass from his briefcase. What followed was the most thorough examination Jamal had ever witnessed. Lawrence inspected every inch of the car: the paint, the chrome, the interior, the engine. He photographed VIN plates from multiple angles, checked build sheets against factory records he pulled up on his tablet, ran his fingers along seams and joints with the delicacy of a surgeon. "This is a genuine 1967 Shelby GT500, he said after nearly an hour. "No question about it. The VN matches factory records. The build date is consistent. All the components are correct for the model year. Your father maintained it impeccably." "What's it worth?" Bernard asked, unable to contain himself. Lawrence considered. "At auction, conservatively 400 to 500,000, with the right buyer possibly 600,000. The condition is remarkable. I'd grade it as near perfect original restoration." The numbers still felt unreal. Jamal tried to imagine that much money, tried to picture what it could do. Terrell's college tuition paid in full. Keisha's art supplies and lessons. A house, maybe, instead of their cramped apartment. Security he'd never had. The Ferrari took even longer to examine. Lawrence spent 2 hours going over every detail, occasionally making small noises of appreciation or concern. When he finally straightened up, his expression was more complex. "This is authentic," he said carefully. "A genuine 1961 Ferrari 250 GT SWB, one of 176 produced. The VIN is correct, the engine numbers match, the components are all period appropriate. It's an exceptional example." "I hear a but coming," Jamal said. Lawrence smiled slightly. "You're perceptive. There's no but about the car itself. It's legitimate. But the provenance, the ownership history, has some gaps. Between 1970 and 1978, the documentation is thin. Not unusual for cars of this era, especially ones that changed hands privately, but it does raise questions. What kind of questions? Where the car was, who owned it, how it was transferred. There are documented sales in 1965 and 1968, then nothing until 1978 when it appears in an estate sale. Your father purchased it in 1996 from another estate sale, and his documentation from that point forward is flawless. But those earlier gaps, they could potentially be problematic." Jamal felt his stomach tighten. "Problematic how?" "In rare cases, missing provenance can indicate stolen property, illegitimate transfers, things of that nature." I'm not suggesting that's the case here. Your father clearly did his due diligence, but buyers at this level want complete histories. They want to know every owner, every transaction. Would it affect the value? Potentially. A Ferrari like this, with perfect provenance, could bring 10 to 12 million at auction. With gaps in the history, maybe 8 to 9 million. Still an extraordinary sum, but the uncertainty creates risk for buyers. 8 to 9 million. Jamal tried to wrap his mind around it. Even at the lower estimate, the Ferrari alone represented more money than he'd earn in his entire career as a teacher. What do you recommend? He asked. Get the documentation reviewed by a specialist in automotive provenance. There are experts who can sometimes fill in gaps through research, old registration records, insurance documents, photographs from car shows. It's possible the missing years can be accounted for. Your father may have done that research himself. After Lawrence left, promising a written appraisal within a few days, Jamal sat in the garage with Bernard, both of them staring at the cars in silence. Your daddy was something else, Bernard said finally. All these years none of us knew. Did you really not know? Not even suspect? Bernard shifted uncomfortably. I knew he traveled more than a regular mechanic would. Knew he had money put. Way, he helped me out a few times when construction work dried up, never asked for it back. But this, he gestured at the cars, never imagined anything like this. He kept it from all of us. Maybe he thought he was protecting you. You know how Vernon was. Practical, careful. Probably didn't want you counting on money that wasn't guaranteed. Better to surprise you after he was gone than have you depending on it while he was alive. It made sense in a way. Vernon had been a man who planned for contingencies, who built safety nets without announcing them. This was just an extension of that nature, taken to an extreme Jamal never would have predicted. His phone rang. Diane. Well, she demanded. What did the appraiser say? Jamal told her. Listened to her sharp intake of breath when he mentioned the numbers, her immediate pivot to practical concerns about insurance and security. You can't keep them in that garage, she said. Not with that kind of value. You need climate control, security systems. Diane, they've been in that garage for decades. They're fine, but now people know about them. Word gets around. You need to protect them. She was right, of course. Jamal made a mental note to look into security upgrades. But first, he needed to address the provenance issue Lawrence had mentioned. That evening, after picking up the kids from Diane's house, Jamal sat down with Vernon's journal and really studied it. Not just the surface entries, but the coded notes, the references to research and documentation. His father had been systematic about everything. Why would this be different? He found what he was looking for on a page dated 8 years ago. Ferrari provenance research complete. Documentation filed in safe. Combination JKV0412. Safe? Jamal didn't remember seeing a safe in the garage. The next morning, he returned to search more carefully. It took an hour of examining every wall panel, every cabinet, before he found it. A slight irregularity in the paneling behind the workbench. When he pressed it, the panel swung open to reveal a small fireproof safe built into the wall. JKV0412. He tried the combination. J for Jamal, K for Keisha, V for Vernon. 412, April 12th, Jamal's birthday. The safe opened. Inside, he found neat stacks of cash, $50,000 in hundreds. Documentation folders organized by date and subject. And a videotape labeled in Vernon's handwriting, for Jamal, if there's ever questions. His hands shook as he lifted out the tape. His father had known, had anticipated that someone might challenge the car's legitimacy, had prepared for it. Even from beyond the grave, Vernon was taking care of details, protecting his son. Jamal pulled out his phone and called his family. I need you all to come to Dad's house tonight. I found something important. When they gathered that evening, Diane and her husband, Bernard, Terrell, and Keisha, Jamal explained about the safe, about the video. Bernard had to retrieve an old VHS player from his basement, connecting it to Vernon's ancient television with cables that barely fit modern inputs. They sat in Vernon's living room, the same room where Jamal had grown up, and watched his father appear on the screen. Vernon looked older in the video, filmed perhaps 5 years ago, but his eyes were clear and his voice was steady. "If you're watching this," Vernon said, looking directly into the camera as if he could see them across time, "someone's probably questioning the Ferrari. I want you to know the truth." For the next 30 minutes, Vernon explained everything. How he'd discovered the Ferrari at an estate sale in 1996. How he'd done extensive research before purchasing it, tracing its history through decades of ownership. How he'd discovered that the car's VIN had been legally changed in 1978 as part of a legitimate retitling process after a complex ownership dispute was resolved. "The gaps in provenance from 1970 to 1978, Vernon said, "those aren't because the car was stolen or illegitimate. They're because the car was involved in a legal dispute between two collectors, and during that time it was held by the court. When the case was settled, the car was sold and properly retitled. All the documentation is in the safe." He pulled out papers on camera, showing where each document was filed, explaining what each one proved. It was Vernon at his most meticulous, his most thorough. This was the automotive detective Sterling had described, the man who could trace a car through layers of history that would baffle others. "I didn't want to burden you with complications," Vernon said near the end of the video. "But I also didn't want you to be caught off guard. These cars are legitimate. They're yours. They represent every hour I worked, every sacrifice I made, every hope I had for your future. Trust yourself, son. You're stronger than you know." His father's final words on the tape, "I'm proud of you, Jamal. Always have been. I love you." The screen went to static. In Vernon's living room, there wasn't a dry eye. Even Diane was crying. Her careful composure finally cracked. Bernard sobbed openly, no shame in his grief. Terrell had his arm around Keisha, both of them processing their grandfather's words. Jamal felt something shift inside him. The grief was still there, would always be there. But alongside it now was something else. Understanding, connection, a sense of his father's presence that was stronger than it had been when Vernon was alive. "He really did think of everything," Diane said, wiping her eyes. "Even this, even knowing someone might challenge the cars." "That was Vernon," Bernard agreed. "Always 3 steps ahead." Jamal gathered the documentation from the safe. Everything his father had promised was there. Court records, legal filings, retitling documents, correspondence with the Ferrari factory in Italy. It was a complete provenance, every gap filled, every question answered. The next day, he called Lawrence and explained about the video and the documents. The appraiser asked him to bring everything in for review. When Lawrence saw the paperwork, his professional skepticism gave way to genuine admiration. "Your father was thorough," he said, photographing each document. "This completely addresses the provenance concerns. With this documentation, the Ferrari's value is solidly in the 10 to 12 million range. Possibly higher with the right buyer, 10 to 12 million. Plus the Shelby's value. Jamal's modest life as a teacher, his struggles to make ends meet, his worries about his children's future, all of it transformed by his father's careful planning." "What should I do?" he asked Lawrence. "Keep them? Sell them? That's not a question I can answer. But I can tell you that the market for cars like these is strong. If you wanted to sell, I could connect you with serious collectors. Or you could keep one and sell the other. Or keep both as investments. They'll only appreciate in value." Jamal thought about it all the way home. Thought about what Vernon had said on the video. These cars represented his father's life's work, his legacy. But they were also Jamal's now, his to do with as he chose. That night, he sat down with Terrell and Keisha and laid out the situation honestly. "These cars are worth about $13 million total. That's enough to change our lives. But I want your input. What do you think we should do?" Terrell spoke first. "I think Grandpa wanted you to make your own choice. He said trust yourself." Keisha was quieter, more thoughtful. "Could we keep one? So we remember him?" "Oh, we could do that," Jamal agreed. "Keep one, sell the other. Use the money to secure our future, but hold on to part of Grandpa's legacy." It felt right. a balance between honoring Vernon's gift and building their own path forward. The Ferrari would sell. Its value would provide security beyond anything Jamal had imagined. But the Shelby would stay, a connection to his father, something to pass down to his own children someday. "I think Grandpa would like that," Terrell said. Jamal pulled out his phone and called Sterling. Told him about the decision, asked for his help finding the right buyer for the Ferrari. "I know exactly the right person," Sterling said. "A collector who specializes in Ferraris from this era. He's been looking for a 250 GT SWB for years. Let me make some calls." As Jamal ended the conversation, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but certainty. His father had given him more than money. Vernon had given him confidence, had shown him that careful planning and meticulous work could create something extraordinary, had proven that love could be expressed through actions as much as words. The path forward was becoming clear. Jamal just had to trust himself enough to walk it. Sterling worked quickly. Within 3 days, he'd arranged a meeting with the collector he'd mentioned, a man named Charles Whitmore III, heir to an automotive fortune and owner of one of the most prestigious private car collections in the country. The meeting would take place at Whitmore's estate, a 2-hour drive north, and Sterling insisted on accompanying Jamal. "This is your first major negotiation," Sterling explained over the phone. "Charles is a good man, but he's also shrewd. You'll want someone in your corner who knows the game." Jamal was grateful. The world of million-dollar car sales was so far outside his experience that he felt like an astronaut preparing for a spacewalk, untethered and vulnerable in an environment he didn't understand. He told Terrell and Keisha about the meeting. His son's eyes lit up with excitement, but Keisha was quieter, more reflective. "Are you sad to sell it?" she asked that evening while Jamal was reviewing the Ferrari's documentation for the 100th time. "A little," he admitted. "But I think it's the right thing to do. Grandpa wanted these cars to help us, not just sit in a garage." "But you're keeping the Shelby." "I am. That one stays with us. Maybe someday you or your brother will want it." She nodded, satisfied. "Then in that way, children have of cutting through complexity to reach truth. I think Grandpa would be happy. He always wanted to take care of us." The morning of the meeting, Jamal dressed in his best suit, the one he wore to parent-teacher conferences and important school events. Sterling picked him up in his Mercedes, elegant in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jamal's entire wardrobe. "Nervous?" Sterling asked as they drove north through rolling countryside that grew progressively more expensive with each mile. "I'm terrified," Jamal admitted. "Good, fear keeps you sharp. Just remember, you have something Charles wants desperately. That gives you power in this negotiation." Whitmore's estate was everything Jamal had imagined and more. A long driveway wound through manicured grounds to a mansion that looked like it belonged in a European tourism brochure. Behind the main house, he could see what appeared to be a massive garage facility, bigger than most commercial buildings. Charles Whitmore III met them at the door himself. He was in his 50s, tall and fit, with the casual confidence of someone who'd never worried about money a day in his life. But his handshake was warm, his smile genuine, and when he looked at Jamal, there was respect in his eyes. "Mr. Carter, thank you for making the trip. Sterling's told me about your father's Ferrari. I've been searching for a 250 GT SWB for almost a decade." He led them through the house, all high ceilings and original artwork, to his collection facility. Jamal had thought Vernon's garage impressive, but this was a cathedral to automotive excellence. Row after row of pristine vehicles, each one a masterpiece, each one worth a fortune. The lighting was museum quality, the climate control sophisticated, the organization immaculate. "My life's work," Charles said with obvious pride. 40 years of collecting, but there are still gaps, cars I haven't been able to acquire. The 250 GT SWB is my white whale. They sat in an office overlooking the collection, and Jamal presented Vernon's documentation. Charles reviewed everything with the care of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. He asked questions about the provenance, nodded approvingly at Vernon's meticulous records, made notes on a legal pad. "Your father knew what he was doing," Charles said finally. This documentation is flawless. The retitling in 1978, the court resolution, it's all properly recorded. There's no question about legitimacy. So you're interested? Sterling asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Very much so. The car is exactly what I've been looking for. Charles named a figure, $9.8 million. Jamal's vision swam. He'd known the car was valuable, had heard the estimates, but having someone actually offer that much money for a car, for something his father had owned, it didn't feel real. Sterling leaned forward slightly. Charles, we both know that's below market for a vehicle of this quality with this provenance. The market's volatile right now. 9.8 is fair. Fair would be 10.5. I have two other collectors who'd meet that price. It was a bluff. Sterling had mentioned no other buyers, but Charles didn't challenge it. The two men negotiated back and forth, their voices calm and professional, while Jamal sat there trying to process numbers that represented more money than most people saw in a lifetime. They settled on 10.2 million. Charles would arrange authentication through his own experts, but pending that formality, they had a deal. I'll have my attorneys draw up the paperwork, Charles said, extending his hand to Jamal. Your father had exquisite taste. This Ferrari will be the crown jewel of my collection. Driving back, Jamal felt like he was floating. $10.2 million. After taxes and Sterling's commission, which the older man insisted on keeping modest, Jamal would net somewhere around $8 million. It was generational wealth. It was security beyond his wildest dreams. It was his father's love made tangible. You did well in there, Sterling said. Stayed calm, let me handle the negotiation, but asked good questions. Vernon would be proud. I just sat there in shock. That's all you needed to do. The first major sale is always overwhelming. But you'll grow into this, Jamal. Your father's legacy isn't just the money. It's the example he set. Careful planning, meticulous work, thinking ahead. Those are skills you can apply to anything. Back at his apartment that evening, Jamal gathered his children and told them about the deal. Terrell whooped with joy, already mentally planning his future. Isha hugged Jamal tightly, whispering, Grandpa was really smart, wasn't he? The smartest man I knew, Jamal agreed. But later that night, alone in his room, Jamal found himself crying. Not from joy, though there was joy in knowing his children's futures were secure. Not from grief, though he missed his father with an ache that wouldn't fade. He cried from the weight of understanding, from finally seeing Vernon clearly. His father had lived two lives, had balanced two worlds, had kept secrets for decades, all to give his son something precious. Not just money, but the freedom to choose. The freedom to teach because he loved it, not because he desperately needed the salary. The freedom to be the father he wanted to be, unburdened by the financial stress that had defined Jamal's life since Angela died. Vernon had given him freedom, and in doing so, had finally shown Jamal how much he'd been loved all along. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Charles's authentication team confirmed everything Vernon's documentation had claimed. The Ferrari's history was exactly as recorded: legitimate ownership, proper transfers, legal retitling in 1978. The sale could proceed. Diane helped him set up meetings with financial advisors. You need to invest this properly, she insisted. Make it work for you long-term, not just spend it. She was right, of course. Jamal met with 3 different advisors before finding one who understood that he wanted security, not aggressive growth. Conservative investments, college funds for the kids, a house. Nothing flashy, nothing risky, just stability. Uncle Bernard stopped by the garage one afternoon while Jamal was sitting with the Shelby, the one car he'd decided to keep. You made the right choice, Bernard said, running his hand along the Shelby's fender with reverence. Selling the Ferrari, keeping this one. Vernon would approve. How can you be sure? Because he knew you, Jamal. Knew you weren't the type to need 2 8-figure cars. Knew you'd be practical, would use the money wisely. That's why he left the choice to you. They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 men connected by love for someone no longer present. Finally, Bernard spoke again. You know what the funny thing is? Vernon spent his whole life being careful with money, living modestly, saving everything. But in the end, all that money meant nothing compared to what he really wanted. What did he want? To know his son was taken care of. To know his grandchildren would have chances he never had. That's what all this was about. Not the cars themselves, but what they could give you. Jamal realized Bernard was right. The cars were just metal and paint and mechanical precision. What mattered was the intent behind them, the love that had motivated decades of careful work and saving and planning. His father had been building a safety net for 20 years, one acquisition at a time, one investment at a time. Not for himself, but for the family he'd raised and the future he'd wanted them to have. A week later, the sale finalized. Charles's team arrived with a specialized trailer to transport the Ferrari to his collection. Jamal watched them load it, feeling an unexpected pang of loss. This car had been his father's prize, the culmination of Vernon's career as an automotive detective. Now it was leaving, going to someone who would treasure it, but would never know the man who'd found it. Charles himself came for the transfer. He walked around the Ferrari one final time before it was loaded, his expression almost reverent. "Your father must have been extraordinary," he said to Jamal. "To find a car like this, to preserve it so perfectly, to have the discipline to hold on to it for decades. That takes a special kind of person." "He was special," Jamal agreed. "I'm only just beginning to understand how much." After they left, Jamal stood in the garage with just the Shelby remaining. The space felt empty now, incomplete, but also full of possibility. He thought about what Sterling had said, about Vernon's example of careful planning and meticulous work, about thinking ahead and building something meaningful. An idea had been forming in Jamal's mind for days, growing stronger each time he sat in this garage. The space was too big for just one car, too full of Vernon's presence to let it sit empty. And Jamal had resources now, had the freedom to do something meaningful with this space his father had loved. He pulled out his phone and called Diane. "I want to start a program," he said, "using Dad's garage, teaching kids basic car maintenance, giving them skills they can use." "That's a wonderful idea," Diane said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Dad would love that. I want to call it Vernon's Legacy Workshop. Open to any kid who wants to learn, no charge. Just passing on what Dad knew the way he would have wanted. When do you want to start?" "Soon," Jamal said, looking around the garage that had held so many secrets. "As soon as I can get things organized." For the first time since Vernon's death, Jamal felt not just grief or understanding, but purpose. His father had given him resources and freedom. Now it was Jamal's turn to decide what to do with those gifts, to build his own legacy, one that honored Vernon's memory while creating something new. 2 weeks after the Ferrari sale, Jamal sat alone in Vernon's house, going through his father's belongings with a different purpose. He was looking for the man behind the mechanic, the detective behind the modest exterior, and he was finding him in unexpected places. In Vernon's bedroom closet, behind the work clothes and Sunday suits, Jamal discovered a box of letters. Not the kind that come in the mail, but letters Vernon had written and never sent. Dozens of them, spanning years, all addressed to Jamal. His hands trembled as he carried the box to Vernon's reading chair, worn leather, shaped by decades of his father's body. The first letter was dated 15 years ago, right around when Jamal had gotten his teaching credential. "Dear Jamal," it began in Vernon's careful handwriting. "Today, you told me you'd been offered the job at Washington Middle. I saw the worry in your eyes when you mentioned the salary, the concern that it wouldn't be enough. I wanted to tell you then that money isn't everything, that following your calling matters more than any paycheck. But I couldn't find the words, so I'm writing them here instead." The letter went on for 2 pages. Vernon wrote about his pride in Jamal's choice, about how teaching was noble work that shaped futures in ways mechanics never could. He wrote about his own regrets, chances not taken, words not spoken, emotional connections left unmade. He wrote about wanting to be better, to show his love more clearly, but not knowing how. "I'm giving you what I couldn't give myself, freedom and security," Vernon had written. The cars I'm collecting, the investments I'm making, they're my way of saying what I struggle to say out loud. I love you. I'm proud of you. I want you to have a life without the financial fear that drove so many of my decisions. Jamal read through letter after letter, watching his life unfold through his father's eyes. There was one written after Angela's diagnosis, Vernon's anguish pouring onto the page as he grappled with his son's suffering and his own inability to fix it. Another from when Terrell was born, full of joy and hope and promises to be a better grandfather than he'd been a father. One letter, dated 5 years ago, addressed the cars directly. "By now you've probably found the Shelby and the Ferrari," Vernon wrote. "I hope they help you, but more than that, I hope you understand what they represent. Not just money, but years of work. Not just investments, but faith in your future. I didn't tell you about them because I didn't want you counting on something that wasn't guaranteed. The market could have crashed. The cars could have been damaged. Nothing is certain except my love for you and my belief in the man you've become." Jamal had to stop reading. The tears came hard and fast, years of misunderstanding dissolving in the face of his father's written testimony. Vernon hadn't been distant, he'd been protective. Hadn't been cold, just inarticulate. Every silence had been full of love Jamal hadn't recognized. He called Terrell and Keisha, needed them there with him. They came quickly, sensing the importance in his voice. He read them selections from the letters, shared their grandfather's words about them. Vernon had written about Terrell's determination on the basketball court, about Keisha's artistic vision, about the pride he felt watching them grow into themselves. "He really did love us," Keisha said, wiping her eyes. "He just didn't know how to show it." "He showed it," Jamal corrected gently. "We just didn't know how to see it." That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Jamal made a decision. These letters needed to be preserved, but not hidden away. They were too important, contained too much wisdom about love and legacy and the complicated ways people try to care for each other. He would keep them in Vernon's journal, alongside the mechanical records and the business notes. They belonged together, the two sides of his father, finally united in one place. The next morning, Jamal began seriously planning Vernon's legacy workshop. He sketched out a curriculum based on what his father had taught him as a child. Basic maintenance, oil changes, tire rotation, brake inspection. Things every person should know about their vehicle, regardless of whether they ever became mechanics. He contacted the school district about using the program as a summer offering for students. The response was enthusiastic. Budget cuts had eliminated most vocational programs years ago, and administrators jumped at the chance to offer something practical without cost to the district. Diane helped him navigate the paperwork, insurance, liability, registration as a non-profit. Her organizational skills proved invaluable, turning his vision into concrete plans. Uncle Bernard volunteered to help teach, bringing his own expertise and his connection to Vernon. "Your daddy would be so proud," Bernard said as they cleaned and organized the garage one Saturday. "Using his space like this, passing on what he knew. This is exactly right." But as they worked, Bernard grew quieter, more contemplative. Finally, he set down the wrench he'd been organizing and looked at Jamal seriously. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "About your daddy and that Ferrari." Jamal felt his stomach drop. "What about it?" "Vernon asked me to help him research it, back when he first bought it. This was almost 30 years ago now. He was concerned about some gaps in the ownership history, wanted to make sure everything was legitimate before he committed. And we found something odd. The car had been reported stolen in 1995, year before Vernon bought it. But the VIN didn't match, close but not exact. Vernon spent months tracking down the truth, making sure the car he was buying wasn't the stolen one. He documented all that, Jamal said. "It's in the video he left, in the paperwork. Different car, different VIN. I know. But here's what worries me. The man who reported that car stolen, he never found it. As far as I know, that case is still open. And if someone with money and lawyers decided to look into it, decided to claim your daddy's car was actually theirs, but it's not. The documentation proves it's not." "You're right," Bernard agreed. But rich folks with lawyers don't always care about right. They care about winning. I'm not saying it'll happen. I'm just saying be prepared in case someone comes around asking questions. The conversation haunted Jamal for days. He'd sold the Ferrari. Charles Whitmore owned it now. But if there were legal challenges, would they come after him? After the sale? He'd used that money to buy a house, to set up college funds, to establish the non-profit. If someone claimed the Ferrari had been stolen, he called Sterling, explained Bernard's concerns. I remember Vernon researching that, Sterling said. He was meticulous about it. The stolen car from 1995 had a different VN. The numbers were close, but definitively different. Vernon documented everything, and Charles's authentication team verified it all before the sale. You're protected, Jamal. But what if someone challenges it anyway? Then they'll lose. The documentation is ironclad. Try not to worry about this. Vernon covered every base. Jamal wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust that his father's thoroughness would protect them from future complications. But doubt had been planted, and it grew quietly in the back of his mind. He focused instead on the workshop. Registration opened, and within 2 days they had 20 students signed up, kids from all backgrounds, some car enthusiasts, others just looking for practical skills. Jamal felt a surge of purpose seeing those names. This was real. This was meaningful. This was his father's legacy growing into something new. The week before the workshop was set to begin, Jamal took Terrell and Keisha to the garage to help with final preparations. They organized tools, set up workstations, created a welcome area with some of Vernon's memorabilia, photos from his years working with Sterling, magazine articles about cars he'd helped authenticate. The journal opened to a page where Vernon had written about his pride in teaching his son to change oil. It feels like Grandpa's here, Keisha said, looking around at everything they'd created. He is here, Jamal replied, in everything we're doing. That evening, as they locked up the garage, Jamal's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Carter, this is Patricia Okonkwo. I'm an attorney with Caldwell and Associates. I'm calling regarding the 1961 Ferrari 250 GT SWB you recently sold to Charles Whitmore III. Jamal's blood ran cold. What about it? We represent a client who has reason to believe that vehicle may be stolen property. We'd like to discuss this matter with you at your earliest convenience. The world tilted. Bernard's warning had been prophetic. Someone was challenging the Ferrari's legitimacy. And despite all of Vernon's careful documentation, despite Sterling's assurances, Jamal was about to face a legal battle he'd never wanted and couldn't afford to lose. I'll need to consult with my own attorney, he managed to say. Of course. But, Mr. Carter, I should inform you, my client is prepared to pursue this matter aggressively. If that vehicle is the one reported stolen in 1995, current law would require its return to the rightful owner, and you could potentially be liable for the purchase price you received from Mr. Whitmore, $10 million. They were talking about $10 million that Jamal had already spent, already used to build his new life. Money that would destroy him if he had to pay it back. The car isn't stolen, Jamal said, fighting to keep his voice steady. My father documented its complete provenance. The VIN numbers don't match the stolen vehicle. We'll see what the evidence shows. Expect formal notification within the week. Good evening, Mr. Carter. She hung up. Jamal stood there in the driveway, his phone dead in his hand, watching his children through the window as they laughed about something, innocent and unaware that their world might be about to collapse. Everything his father had built, everything Vernon had carefully planned and documented and preserved, it was all under threat. And Jamal had no idea how to protect it. The registered mail arrived 3 days later, thick and official. Legal documents from Caldwell and Associates claiming that the 1961 Ferrari 250 GT SWB was reported stolen property. The claimant was identified as Charles Whitmore III, the very man who had purchased the car from Jamal. Jamal read the documents 3 times, his confusion growing with each pass. Charles was claiming his own purchase was stolen. It made no sense until he reached page 4, where the full picture emerged. Charles hadn't filed the claim. His son had. Charles Whitmore IV, acting through his father's estate, claimed to have discovered that the Ferrari matched the description of a vehicle stolen from the Whitmore family collection in 1995. The younger Whitmore demanded either the return of the vehicle or payment of its current market value, $10 million. But Charles Whitmore III had bought the car. How could his own son be claiming it was stolen from the family? Jamal called Sterling immediately. "It's a shakedown," Sterling said, his voice tight with anger. "Charles IV has been trying to get control of his father's collection for years. The old man won't give it to him. Says his son doesn't respect the cars, just sees them as investments. This is Charles IV's way of causing trouble, but he's claiming it was stolen from their collection in 1995. There was a Ferrari reported stolen from the Whitmore estate in 1995, but it wasn't this Ferrari. The VIN numbers don't match. Your father verified that extensively. Then why is he doing this?" Sterling sighed. "Because legal battles are expensive and time-consuming. He's hoping you'll settle rather than fight. Pay him some portion of what you received, make the problem go away. It's extortion dressed up in legal language." Jamal felt sick. He'd already used most of the Ferrari money. The house down payment, the college funds, the non-profit setup. It was allocated, invested, gone. He couldn't pay $10 million even if he wanted to. "What do I do?" "Get a good attorney. Fight this. You have all of Vernon's documentation. You have the truth on your side. How much will fighting cost?" The pause before Sterling answered told Jamal everything. Automotive litigation at this level. Probably $200,000 minimum. Could be more if it goes to trial, $200,000. Jamal had that money barely, but spending it on lawyers would devastate the security he'd built. The college funds would survive, but the non-profit would have to shut down before it even started. The house might be at risk. He sat in Vernon's garage that night, staring at the Shelby, feeling the weight of impossible choices. His father had been so careful, so meticulous. But even Vernon's thoroughness might not be enough against someone with unlimited resources and no scruples. Diane came over when he called, her face grave. "You have to fight this. You can't let them bully you." "With what?" "If I spend everything on legal fees, then you spend it. Dad left you those cars to give you security. Use that security to protect yourself." Uncle Bernard was less certain. "Maybe you negotiate. Offer them something. Make this go away. Fighting rich people, that's a fight you can't win." "Vernon won everything," Jamal said quietly. "Because he was right. Because he had the documentation. Vernon wasn't facing someone trying to destroy him. But as Jamal sat there, something occurred to him. His father's video had been titled, "For Jamal, If There's Ever Questions." Vernon had anticipated legal challenges, had prepared for them. Maybe there was more documentation, more evidence, more protection Vernon had built into his careful plans. He went back to the safe, pulled everything out, examined each document more carefully. Most of it he'd already reviewed, but there, at the bottom in a sealed envelope, was something new. A letter addressed to him in Vernon's handwriting, "Open if someone challenges the Ferrari." His hands shook as he broke the seal. "Jamal," Vernon's letter began, "if you're reading this, someone has questioned the Ferrari's legitimacy. I'm not surprised. That car has a complicated history, and there are people who might see opportunity in that complexity. But I want you to know the complete truth, because the complete truth will protect you." Vernon went on to explain in detail what he'd discovered during his research. The Ferrari reported stolen in 1995 had indeed been from a private collection, but that collection had insurance fraud issues. The owner had reported the car stolen to collect insurance money while actually selling it privately. That fraudulent Ferrari had never been recovered because it didn't need to be. It was safely hidden in another collection under a false identity. Vernon's Ferrari was different. It had a legitimate documented history. But more than that, Vernon had discovered proof of the insurance fraud and had documented it meticulously. He'd kept this information as insurance of his own. evidence that could expose the original theft claim as fraudulent. If anyone challenges your ownership, Vernon wrote, this evidence will show that the 1995 theft claim itself was false. The real stolen car, if it was ever really stolen, is somewhere else entirely. Your Ferrari is clean, but more importantly, anyone who tries to claim it's the stolen vehicle will find themselves facing questions about insurance fraud. That should make them think twice. Attached to the letter were documents Vernon had compiled, insurance records, investigation notes, correspondence with officials who'd handled the 1995 case. Everything needed to prove that the original theft claim had been suspicious from the start. Jamal stared at the papers, understanding dawning. His father had built multiple layers of protection. The first layer was the legitimate provenance of the Ferrari itself. The second layer was evidence that any challenge to that provenance would open up bigger legal problems for the challenger. Vernon had been 3 steps ahead, just like always. The next morning, Jamal hired Patricia Okonkwo, the same attorney who'd called on behalf of the Whitmores. When he explained that he wanted to hire her instead of opposing her, there was a long pause. I'd need to withdraw from representing Charles IV, she said carefully. And I'd need to understand why you want me specifically. Because you know the case. Because you're already familiar with the details. And because I have evidence I think you'll find very interesting. They met the following day. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 40s, professionally dressed, with eyes that missed nothing. Jamal laid out everything. Vernon's documentation, the video, the final letter with its explosive evidence about the 1995 fraud. Patricia reviewed it all silently, her expression growing more interested with each page. Finally, she looked up. Your father was either a genius or incredibly paranoid. Both, I think. This evidence about the insurance fraud, if it's legitimate, it completely undermines any claim Charles IV might make. The car he's alleging was stolen probably never existed as a theft victim. It was insurance fraud. Can we prove that? Your father already did most of the work, but we'd need to verify some of these documents, track down people he interviewed, make sure the chain of evidence is solid. That takes time and money. How much? Patricia considered. To build an airtight defense? Maybe 50,000 in investigation costs. Then legal fees if it goes to court, but honestly, I don't think it will. Once we present this evidence to Charles IV's attorneys, they'll back down. No one wants to pursue a claim that might expose them to fraud charges. 50,000 instead of 200,000. Jamal could manage that barely. But there was still risk, still uncertainty. What if Patricia was wrong? What if the Whitmores pushed forward anyway? There's another option, Patricia said. We could reach out to Charles III directly. The father, not the son. Explain the situation. Show him what we have. He's the one who actually purchased the car from you. He has no reason to want this lawsuit to succeed. It would only embarrass him and cost him money. If we can get him on our side, this goes away. It was a gamble. But Jamal thought about his father's careful planning, his patient approach to problems. Vernon wouldn't have gone into court swinging. He would have found the smart path, the one that solved the problem with minimum damage. Let's talk to Charles III, Jamal decided. Sterling arranged the meeting. Charles III was furious when he learned what his son had done. I bought that car in good faith, he said, his face red with anger. Authenticated it thoroughly. Now my own son is trying to claim it's stolen. This is about him trying to force me to hand over my collection before I'm ready. Jamal showed him Vernon's evidence about the 1995 insurance fraud. Watched understanding dawn on the older man's face. So the car I bought is legitimate, but any attempt to claim it's stolen would expose fraud from 30 years ago. That's what my father discovered. He kept this information as protection, in case anyone ever challenged the sale. Charles III sat back in his leather chair, a smile slowly spreading across his face. Your father was a clever man, very clever. He picked up his phone. I'm calling my son's attorney right now. This lawsuit ends today. The conversation was brief and pointed. Charles III made it clear that he would not tolerate any challenge to the Ferrari's legitimacy. that he had evidence which would make such challenges very uncomfortable for everyone involved, and that if his son persisted, he would cut him off financially. 20 minutes after the call ended, Patricia received notification that Charles IV was withdrawing his claim. Just like that, the threat evaporated. Jamal sat in Patricia's office, barely believing it was over. "My father really did think of everything. He protected you," Patricia agreed. "Not just with good documentation, but with leverage. That's sophisticated planning." Driving home, Jamal felt something shift inside him. The fear that had gripped him for weeks released its hold. Vernon's protection had worked exactly as his father intended. Even facing wealthy people with expensive lawyers, even confronting claims designed to intimidate, the truth and careful preparation had been enough. That evening, he gathered his family in Vernon's garage, told them everything, the threat, the evidence, the resolution, watched relief flood their faces. "Grandpa saved us again," Terrell said. "Even though he's gone." "He's not gone," Keisha corrected softly. "He's right here, in everything he planned, everything he left us. He's still taking care of us." She was right. Vernon was present in every document he'd filed, every contingency he'd planned for, every layer of protection he'd built. His love hadn't ended with his death. It continued in the legacy he'd created, the security he'd provided, the wisdom he'd left behind. Uncle Bernard raised a glass. They'd started keeping a bottle of Vernon's favorite whiskey in the garage for moments like this. To Vernon, smartest damn man any of us ever knew. They drank to that. And as Jamal looked around at his family, at the garage that would soon be full of students learning skills his father had mastered, at the Shelby that represented Vernon's life work, he felt something he hadn't felt since before the funeral: peace, connection, understanding. His father's final gift wasn't the cars or the money. It was the lesson that love could be expressed through careful action, through planning ahead, through protecting the people you cared about even after you were gone. Vernon had taught him that in death more clearly than he ever could have in life, and Jamal would carry that lesson forward, building his own legacy on the foundation his father had laid. With the legal threat resolved, Jamal threw himself into preparing for Vernon's legacy workshop. The first session was scheduled for Monday morning, just 3 days away, and there was still so much to do. He spent Saturday organizing tools, creating workstations for each of the 20 students who'd registered. Uncle Bernard arrived early with coffee and his own toolbox, ready to help set everything up. Together they arranged the garage into a teaching space that would have made Vernon proud. Organized, efficient, welcoming. "You nervous?" Bernard asked as they mounted a whiteboard on the wall. "Terrified," Jamal admitted. "I'm a history teacher. What do I know about teaching mechanics?" "You know what your daddy taught you. That's enough to start. Besides, you're not trying to make them all mechanics, just teaching them to take care of their vehicles. That's practical wisdom anyone can use." Diane arrived mid-morning with printed materials she'd designed, safety guidelines, basic maintenance checklists, contact information sheets. Her organizational skills transformed Jamal's rough plans into something professional and polished. "Dad would be amazed by this," she said, looking around the transformed space. "You've really honored his memory." Sterling called that afternoon with unexpected news. "I've been thinking about your workshop. I'd like to establish a scholarship fund through my company, $5,000 annually, to support underprivileged students who complete your program and want to pursue automotive careers." Vernon believed in passing knowledge forward. "This feels right." Jamal was overwhelmed by the generosity. $5,000 would cover technical school tuition, tool purchases, certification costs, real opportunities for kids who might not otherwise have them. "Thank you," he managed. "That means everything. Vernon was more than a colleague to me. He was a friend. This is how I honor that friendship." Sunday brought the students for an orientation session. 20 teenagers filed into the garage, some confident, some uncertain, all curious. Jamal saw himself in their faces, young people trying to find their way, looking for skills that might help them build futures. He introduced himself, explained the program, shared a little about his father. Then he did something he hadn't planned. He pulled out Vernon's journal and read an entry from 30 years ago. "Today taught Jamal to check tire pressure," Jamal read. "He was 8 years old and so careful, so precise. He'll be good at whatever he chooses to do. My job is to give him tools he can use, even if he never becomes a mechanic. Everyone needs to know how to take care of the things that carry them through life." The garage was silent. Then one student raised her hand, a girl named Shanice, who'd written on her application that her mother's car kept breaking down and they couldn't afford repairs. "Your dad sounds like he really cared," she said. "He did. He just showed it by teaching, by preparing, by making sure people had what they needed. That's what we're going to do here. Give you knowledge that will serve you your whole life." That evening, Jamal sat in the garage alone, feeling his father's presence stronger than ever. Tomorrow the workshop would begin. Tomorrow, Vernon's legacy would expand beyond family, beyond the cars, into the lives of young people who needed exactly what Vernon had given Jamal: practical skills and quiet confidence. His phone buzzed. A text from Terrell. "Dad, I'm proud of you. Grandpa would be too." Another from Keisha. "Can't wait to draw pictures of the workshop tomorrow. This is important." Jamal looked at the Shelby, gleaming under the garage lights. The car his father had left him, the tangible symbol of Vernon's love. But the real legacy wasn't the car, it was this: the knowledge being passed forward, the lives being shaped, the community being built in this space where Vernon had worked for so many years. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, finding the cars, meeting Sterling, learning about his father's secret life, facing legal threats, watching Vernon's careful planning protect them at every turn. Each step had revealed more about the man who'd raised him, shown Jamal depths of love he'd never recognized when Vernon was alive. The grief was still there, would always be there. But alongside it now was gratitude, understanding, and purpose. Vernon had given him more than money or security. He'd given him an example of how to love across the barrier of inarticulacy, how to provide without demanding recognition, how to build something meaningful that would outlast your own life. Tomorrow, Jamal would begin teaching the first lesson. Basic maintenance, just like Vernon had taught him. Oil changes and tire rotation, brake inspection and fluid checks. Simple skills that empowered people, that gave them control over machines they depended on. But really, he'd be teaching what Vernon had taught him, that love shows itself in preparation, that legacy is built through careful action, that the greatest gift you can give someone is the tools to build their own future. Jamal locked up the garage and headed home. Tomorrow would be the beginning of something new. Vernon's legacy workshop would open its doors, and his father's wisdom would flow into a new generation. The cars had been the catalyst, but this was the real inheritance. The knowledge, the values, the example of a man who'd loved so completely that his protection reached beyond death. His planning continued to provide. His legacy kept growing even after he was gone. Jamal was ready to teach, ready to honor his father, ready to build something meaningful on the foundation Vernon had laid. The workshop was just the beginning. There would be more students, more programs, more ways to pass forward what Vernon had given him. His father had been a master at seeing the long game, at building toward futures he wouldn't personally witness. Now Jamal understood why. Because the real measure of a life wasn't what you accumulated or achieved for yourself. It was what you gave to others, what you built that would continue after you were gone, what you taught that would ripple forward through generations. Vernon Carter had been a simple mechanic to most people, but to those who really knew him, to those who benefited from his careful planning and quiet generosity, he was something far greater. He was a teacher, a builder, a man who'd mastered the art of loving through action. And tomorrow, Jamal would begin carrying that legacy forward. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. Jamal woke at 5, too nervous to sleep any longer. He made coffee, reviewed his lesson plans one more time, and drove to his father's house as the sun was rising. The garage looked perfect in the early light. Clean workstations, organized tools, Vernon's presence in every carefully arranged detail. Jamal stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in, feeling the weight of what he was about to begin. Uncle Bernard arrived at 7:30 with boxes of donuts and a thermos of coffee. Figured the kids might appreciate some fuel. I know I would have at their age. Thanks for being here, Jamal said. I couldn't do this without you. Vernon would have wanted family here. I'm honored to help. The students began arriving at 8. Shanice came first, her mother dropping her off with a wave and a grateful smile. Then others, Antonio with his toolbox, clearly already interested in mechanics. Deshawn, quiet and observant. Kennedy, chattering excitedly about her grandmother's old Cadillac. Each arrival added energy to the space until the garage hummed with young voices and anticipation. At 8:30, Jamal called everyone to gather around. 20 faces looked at him expectantly. He felt Vernon's presence so strongly in that moment it was almost physical, as if his father stood beside him, ready to guide him through this first lesson. "Welcome to Vernon's Legacy Workshop," he began. "My father spent his life working with cars. But more than that, he spent his life empowering people, giving them knowledge and skills they could use to take care of themselves. That's what we're here to do." He showed them around the garage, explaining the safety rules, demonstrating where everything was located. Then he moved to the first lesson, checking and changing oil. "This is the most basic maintenance you can do," Jamal explained, "but it's also one of the most important. Do this regularly, and you'll save yourself thousands in engine repairs." He demonstrated on the Shelby, his hands moving through motions Vernon had taught him decades ago. Drain the old oil, replace the filter, add new oil, check the level. Simple steps that became muscle memory with practice. The students gathered close, watching intently. Then they broke into groups, each working on a different vehicle. Bernard had brought his truck, Diane had volunteered her SUV, and several students had brought their own family cars. Jamal moved between groups, answering questions, correcting technique, offering encouragement. He found himself using Vernon's words, his father's patient teaching style, flowing through him naturally. "That's right, nice and steady. You want the filter tight but not over-tightened. Feel that resistance? That's where you stop. Good job checking the dipstick. Always double-check your work. Vernon used to say, measure twice, act once." By noon, every student had successfully completed an oil change. The pride on their faces was unmistakable. These weren't just skills they'd learned, they were capabilities. They now possessed knowledge that would serve them for life. During lunch break, Shanice approached Jamal hesitantly. "Mr. Carter, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "My mum's car. It's been making this weird noise, like a squealing sound when she brakes. Is that something I could learn to fix? Probably needs new brake pads." "That's exactly the kind of thing we'll cover next week. Bring your mum's car if she's willing, and we'll teach you how to inspect and replace them." The girl's face lit up. "Really? That would save us so much money. We've been putting it off because we can't afford the shop." This was exactly what Vernon had envisioned. Young people gaining practical skills that would help their families, that would give them confidence and capability. Jamal felt his father's approval like a physical warmth. The afternoon session covered tire rotation and pressure checks. Again, the students excelled, their initial uncertainty giving way to growing confidence. By the time they finished at 4 o'clock, the garage was full of tired, dirty, smiling teenagers who'd accomplished something real. As they cleaned up, Antonio approached with several other students. "Mr. Carter, this was amazing. Are you going to do this every summer?" "That's the plan, and maybe expand during the school year too. Saturday sessions, perhaps." "I'll be here," Antonio said. The others nodded agreement. After the students left, Jamal sat on Vernon's workbench, exhausted but fulfilled in a way teaching history had never quite achieved. He'd connected with these kids, given them something tangible, seen immediate impact from his instruction. Bernard clapped him on the shoulder. You were born for this. Vernon knew it. That's why he left you everything. Not just the cars, but the opportunity to do exactly this. Diane arrived to help clean up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Dad would be so proud. You've taken his passion and made it something even bigger. That night, Jamal sat in the garage alone with the Shelby. He'd kept this car when he sold. The Ferrari held onto it as a connection to his father. Now he understood. It was more than that. The Shelby was a tool, something to teach with, to demonstrate on, to share with students who needed to see and touch and understand. Vernon hadn't just left him a valuable car. He'd left him a teaching instrument, a bridge between generations, a way to pass forward everything Vernon had learned in his 68 years of working with machines. Jamal pulled out his phone and looked at the photos from today. Students bent over engines, faces serious with concentration. Bernard demonstrating proper wrench technique. Shanice holding up her dipstick triumphantly after completing her first oil change. These were the moments that mattered. Not the millions from the Ferrari sale, though that provided security. Not even the Shelby's considerable value. What mattered was this: knowledge flowing forward, young people empowered. Vernon's legacy, alive and growing in ways that transcended mere inheritance. Tomorrow they'd tackle brake inspection. Next week, cooling systems. The week after, basic electrical diagnostics. Each lesson building on the last. Each skill adding to the students' capabilities. And through it all, Vernon would be present in the tools he'd organized, the space he'd created, the example he'd set. His quiet love, his careful planning, his belief in empowering others through knowledge. Jamal locked up the garage and headed home, already planning tomorrow's lesson. This was just the beginning. Vernon's legacy workshop would grow, would touch. More lives would become exactly what his father had hoped for, a way to pass forward not just mechanical skills, but the values that had defined Vernon Carter's life. Love through action, legacy through teaching, connection across the barrier between generations, his father's true inheritance, finally understood and fully embraced. The workshop's final day arrived 3 weeks later. 20 students had started the program, and all 20 remained. Unusual for any voluntary summer course. They'd learned oil changes, brake maintenance, tire care, basic electrical diagnostics, and cooling system management. More importantly, they'd gained confidence in their ability to solve problems and care for the machines that carried them through life. Jamal planned something special for the closing session. Instead of another technical lesson, he wanted to share the complete story of how this workshop came to exist. These students deserved to know about Vernon, about the journey that had brought Jamal to this point. He gathered them in a circle on the garage floor just after lunch. The space felt different now, lived in, used, full of the energy of young people learning and growing. Vernon would have loved seeing his sanctuary transformed this way. "I want to tell you about my father," Jamal began. He spoke for 30 minutes, sharing Vernon's story. The quiet mechanic who'd lived a double life as an automotive detective. The careful planner who'd invested everything in his son's future. The inarticulate man who'd expressed love through action rather than words. He told them about finding the cars, about the shock and confusion, about slowly piecing together who Vernon really was. He shared the letters his father had written but never sent, the video message left for protection, the layers of planning that had shielded them from legal threats. "My father never told me he loved me," Jamal said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not once in 45 years. But he showed me every single day through what he built, what he planned, what he left behind. This workshop exists because he believed in passing knowledge forward. Because he understood that the greatest gift you can give someone is the ability to take care of themselves." The students were silent, absorbed in the story. Finally, Shanice raised her hand. "Mr. Carter, thank you for sharing him with us. My mom's car hasn't made that noise since I changed the brake pads. She cried when I showed her what I could do. She said I'd given her a gift." Others shared similar stories. Antonio had helped his grandfather diagnose an alternator problem, saving hundreds in mechanic fees. Kennedy had taught her little brother to check tire pressure. Deshawn, the quiet observer, had decided he wanted to pursue automotive technology in college. "Your father's legacy isn't just this garage," Deshawn said. "It's in all of us now. We'll teach other people. It keeps growing." Jamal had to look away, overcome. This was exactly what Vernon had hoped for. Knowledge rippling outward, touching lives, creating change beyond what one person could achieve alone. That evening, after the students received their certificates of completion, printed by Diane on heavy cardstock, each one personalized, Jamal returned to the garage one more time. He'd been avoiding something, putting it off, because it felt like the final goodbye. But tonight felt right. He went back to Vernon's safe and pulled out the last envelope he'd found there. He'd noticed it weeks ago, but hadn't opened it, afraid of what it might contain. The envelope was labeled simply, "Open after you've fought for what's right." Jamal broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a single handwritten letter, dated just 3 weeks before Vernon's death. "Jamal," it began. "By now you know about the cars, the business, maybe even the legal complications. I could have sold these cars myself and just left you money. But I wanted to give you something more than dollars. I wanted to give you a challenge, a mystery, a reason to dig deep and discover who you really are. I knew about the potential Ferrari claim, could have resolved it before I died. But you needed to prove your strength, needed to learn that you can handle whatever life throws at you. I'd complete faith in you. The documentation I left would protect you, but only if you were brave enough to stand up and use it. You are the man I always hoped you'd become. Different from me, better in ways that matter. You chose teaching over money, chose shaping young minds over easy wealth. That takes courage I never had. I'm so proud of who you are. The cars were never the point. The point was showing you that you're capable of handling anything, that you can face challenges and win, that you have everything you need inside you already. By the time you read this, you'll have fought for what's right and won. You'll have proven to yourself what I always knew, that you're stronger, smarter, and braver than you give yourself credit for. I love you, son. I always have. Make your own choices now. Build your own legacy. You don't need my approval or my guidance anymore. You're ready. With all my love, Dad." Jamal read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. His father had orchestrated everything, not just the inheritance, but the challenges, the discoveries, the growth. Vernon had turned his death into a teaching moment, had used his legacy to push Jamal toward becoming the man he was capable of being. It was manipulation in a way, but it was also the purest expression of love Jamal had ever encountered. Vernon had believed in him so completely that he'd designed tests to prove Jamal's strength to himself, and Jamal had passed every test, had faced legal threats without crumbling, had honored his father's memory while building something new, had taken Vernon's resources and created opportunity for others, had become exactly the man his father had known he could be. He called Terrell and Keisha, asked them to come to the garage. When they arrived, he read them the letter, watched their faces transform as they understood the full depth of their grandfather's planning. "He was teaching you," Terrell said slowly, "even after he died." "That's crazy. That's love," Keisha corrected. "He loved Dad enough to make him strong." They sat together in the garage, 3 generations connected through Vernon's careful planning. The old man who'd started it all, the son who'd discovered his own strength, the grandchildren who'd witnessed the transformation and learned from it. "What are you going to do now?" Terrell asked. Jamal looked around the garage, at the tools Vernon had organized, at the space transformed into a classroom, at the Shelby that represented everything his father had built. "I'm going to keep teaching," he said. "Expand the workshop, reach more kids, create more opportunities. That's what Dad would want. That's what I want." "We'll help," Keisha said immediately. Terrell nodded agreement. It was decided then. Vernon's legacy workshop would continue, would grow, would become a permanent institution. The summer program was just the beginning. They'd add weekend sessions, partner with schools, maybe eventually create a scholarship program for students pursuing automotive careers. Vernon's 2 cars had started this journey. But the real legacy was this: a family united in purpose, a community served, knowledge passed forward across generations. His father had given them more than money or security. He'd given them mission, meaning, and the tools to make a difference. Jamal stood and walked to the Shelby, ran his hand along the burgundy paint, felt the cool metal under his palm. This car was staying with them forever, not as a museum piece or an investment, but as a working tool, something to teach with, to demonstrate on, to share with students who needed to understand that machines could be mastered with patience and knowledge. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered, "for everything, for the challenges and the protection, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself, for showing me that love doesn't need words when actions speak so clearly." In the silence of the garage, Jamal felt his father's presence stronger than ever. Not haunting, not sad, but warm and approving. Vernon was here in every tool, every lesson, every life touched by the workshop. His father's love hadn't ended with death. It continued, grew, expanded into the future Vernon would never see, but had carefully prepared for. That was the real inheritance. Not cars or money, but love that transcended mortality, wisdom that bridged generations, legacy that kept growing long after the builder was gone. 6 months later, life had found a rhythm Jamal never could have imagined when he'd first opened that garage door. He still taught 8th grade history at Washington Middle School. Still loved watching students discover that the past could be exciting, relevant, alive. But now, he also taught at Vernon's Legacy Workshop every Saturday, and the program had grown beyond his wildest hopes. 40 students were enrolled in the fall session. Word had spread through the community about the free automotive training, about the patient teachers and the welcoming environment. Parents called regularly asking when new sessions would open. The local newspaper had run a feature story. And suddenly Jamal found himself something of a local hero. He'd purchased Vernon's house, couldn't bear to sell it, couldn't let strangers live in the space where his father had built so much. Terrell had moved into Vernon's old room, thriving in the quiet neighborhood with space to study and practice basketball. Keisha had claimed the spare bedroom as her art studio, her drawings and paintings covering walls that had once displayed Vernon's careful neutrality. The financial security from the Ferrari sale meant Jamal could breathe for the first time in years. College funds were fully funded. The mortgage was manageable. Medical bills from Angela's illness were finally paid off. He wasn't wealthy by most standards, but he was stable, secure, free from the constant anxiety that had shadowed him since becoming a single father. More importantly, he'd found purpose beyond teaching history. Vernon's Legacy Workshop had become his second calling, the place where he connected with students in ways he never could in a traditional classroom. Here learning was hands-on, practical, immediately useful. Students saw results the same day they learned a skill. Sterling visited regularly, bringing contacts and resources, helping expand the program's reach. He'd established that scholarship fund as promised, and 2 students from the summer session were already enrolled in technical programs with full financial support. Uncle Bernard had become the workshop's heart, teaching alongside Jamal every week, sharing stories about Vernon that kept his brother's memory vivid and present. Bernard's construction work had slowed with age, and the workshop gave him purpose, community, connection to the family he cherished. Diane dropped by most Saturdays with supplies or food or just to watch the students work. Her initial skepticism about the program had transformed into fierce advocacy. She'd used her hospital connections to set up partnerships, helped write grant proposals, turned Jamal's vision into sustainable reality. One Saturday in December, as winter light filtered through the garage windows, Jamal stood back and watched his students at work. Shanice was teaching a new student how to check brake fluid. Antonia was under a car, showing Dishon proper jack placement. Kennedy worked on a carburetor rebuild with Bernard's patient guidance. The garage hummed with productive energy, with learning and teaching and growing. Vernon's tools were being used daily now, kept sharp and ready, fulfilling the purpose for which they'd been maintained all those years. The space itself seemed alive, filled with exactly the kind of activity Vernon would have loved. Terrell appeared in the garage doorway, still in his basketball uniform from morning practice. "Dad, got a minute?" They walked outside together. His son had grown another inch this fall, was looking more like a man than a boy now. College scouts had started attending his games. The future was opening up for him in ways it never could have without Vernon's legacy. "I've been thinking," Terrell said, "about Grandpa, about what he did for us. I want to do something like that too. Not cars, that's your thing, but something meaningful, something that helps people." Jamal felt his chest tighten with pride. "What are you thinking?" "Maybe teaching, like you, or coaching. Using basketball to reach kids who need guidance. I don't know exactly yet, but I want my life to matter the way Grandpa's mattered." "It already matters," Jamal said, "and whatever you choose, you'll be great at it." That's what Grandpa understood. It's not about the specific work you do. It's about doing it with purpose, with care, with the intention to make things better. They stood together watching the students through the garage window. 3 generations of wisdom, flowing from Vernon through Jamal to Terrell, preparing to flow onward into whatever future the young man would build. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Jamal sat in the garage alone with Vernon's journal. He'd been adding his own entries now, documenting the workshop's growth, recording student successes, creating a continuation of his father's careful record-keeping. He wrote about today's session, about Terrell's conversation, about the quiet satisfaction of seeing Vernon's legacy expand in ways his father never could have predicted. Then he wrote something more personal. "Dad, I understand now what you were trying to teach me. Love doesn't need words when actions speak this clearly. You showed me every day through what you built, what you planned, what you left behind. I'm trying to do the same. Not just for Terrell and Keisha, but for all these students who need someone to believe in them the way you believed in me." The cars were just the beginning. The real gift was showing me who I could become. "Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." He closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf beside Vernon's reading glasses and the framed photos Sterling had given him. The garage was a museum of sorts now, but a living one, preserving Vernon's memory while actively using his tools and space to create new memories. Jamal walked to the Shelby, ran his hand along its flank one more time. Tomorrow, he'd bring it out for the students to work on, would let them practice maintenance on a vehicle worth $500,000. Vernon would have loved that, his prized possession being used to teach, to empower, to continue the work he'd started. The garage lights went off. Jamal locked the door and headed home, where his children waited with dinner warming in the oven and stories from their day ready to share. Life had changed in ways he never could have imagined 6 months ago. Not just the financial security, though, that mattered. Not just the workshop, though that brought joy. What had really changed was his understanding of love, of legacy, of what it meant to be a father and a son. Vernon had taught him that love could be quiet but powerful, subtle but profound. That the greatest inheritance wasn't money or possessions, but the values and skills passed from one generation to the next. That a life well lived created ripples that extended far beyond what the person could see. His father was gone, would always be gone. The grief remained, softened by time but permanent in its way. But alongside the grief was something else now, gratitude, understanding, and a sense of connection that transcended death. Vernon lived on in the workshop, in the students' learning skills they'd use for life, in the family he'd protected and provided for, in the example he'd set and the lessons he'd taught without ever speaking them aloud. That was legacy. That was love. That was immortality of the only kind that really mattered. Jamal pulled into his driveway now, his house, his life built on the foundation his father had laid. Terrell's basketball sat on the porch, Keisha's art supplies were visible through the window. Everything Vernon had hoped for them, made possible by everything he'd sacrificed and saved and planned. Inside, his children called out greetings. Dinner smells filled the air. Ordinary domestic life, made extraordinary by the security and opportunity Vernon had provided. Jamal smiled, closed the door behind him, and joined his family at the table. 3 generations bound together by love, expressed through action, by legacy built through careful planning, by connection that would continue long after he too was gone. Vernon's greatest restoration wasn't a car. It was this: a family made whole, a future made bright, love made tangible and permanent and real, everything exactly as it should be.